So you touched on what we'd call the nuts and bolts of ETF capital markets, and thank you for those insights. But it's not just about the nuts and bolts. An often unaware aspect of ETF capital markets is actually the engagement with the sales teams. Can you talk us through that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really crucial, particularly helping clients navigate an ETF in terms of whether that's execution, trading in an ETF, but often it's things like pre-trade analysis, implied liquidity analysis. You know, people will look at an ETF and look at it in a single stock mindset, where they'll say, there's only so much volume, there's only so much AUM, I want to do a large trade. And judging on those metrics, I can't do that large trade. One of the major parts of the capital markets role is that exact point. So you're demystifying liquidity is the key point, right? And you use various different tools there. It's implied liquidity. It's talking about the real underlying liquidity of the ETF, which is driven by the underlying securities and not by the volume or the AUM. And that is really key for an ETF issuer, particularly when they're looking to go from seed to that magic 100 million mark. You know, there are a lot of fund selectors that will screen out an ETF that has assets below 100 million. That's why it is the magic number, if you will. However, navigating that seed to 100 is probably the most difficult part of the ETF journey, and it's one that almost all issuers struggle with. And the capital markets role plays a vital part of navigating that success. And it's the implied liquidity, it's the pre-trade analysis, it's making sure that investors are comfortable trading your ETF and pointing always back to the true liquidity of the ETF and not some of the optics that might sidetrack people.
And we've seen some issuers come to market without putting the right resources in place when it comes to ETF capital markets. What have been the negative effects of that for asset managers that haven't placed the right importance on capital markets?
Yeah, here's a capital markets guy telling you why capital markets is so important, right? But it is crucial in that regard. If you think about that multi-exchange setup that I talked about, right? You have 4 or 5 listings in pounds, dollars, euros, francs, not always, but in most instances. Those exchanges don't speak to each other. The London Stock Exchange trades separately to Swiss SIX. There is no consolidated tape yet. Add to that the fact that in Europe, the number differs depending who you speak to, but roughly 70% of ETFs are traded in the RFQ, request for quote platforms. And that adds another layer of fragmentation. So navigating that is really, really important. If people take the approach of, well, this was successful for our fund and we'll just drop it into an ETF, ignoring the nuances and the complexities and the fragmentation of the ETF world, it will be to their detriment, right? And one of the key parts there is capital markets. It's engaging with the APs that I mentioned, the authorized participants, the market makers, and ensuring that they're aware of all of the nuances of your product, how to trade your product, everything settles and flows in the right way. All of that is key. I mentioned spreads earlier too, right? If you are sitting out there without the contractual market maker in place and you're hoping that it just naturally flows, there'll sometimes be no quotes on exchange, which has its obvious impact in terms of investors looking to trade. Also, if there are quotes there, it could be really, really wide. So an investor turns up to trade, let's call it US equity exposures, and there's no quotes there.